This week, we gave our intern a shot at preparing the intro for the video. Needless to say, she will not be getting paid. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Line. Just to be clear, that was the intro she came up with. We are paying our employees. Back at the start of 2025, I began looking into the missing 411 disappearances here in my home state of Pennsylvania. There were a couple of reasons for that, one being that I was interested to see what these kinds of cases would look like in an area with which I was more familiar, but the other was the one that really got me interested. At the beginning of Missing 411 Eastern United States, Paulides gives lists of all the missing people in each of his clusters, generally grouped by state or broader US region like New England. The lists usually involve a few to a dozen names, with the smallest being Northeastern Minnesota at just 3 people, and the second largest being the Great Smokies cluster, which we covered in 2024, at 14 individuals. Pennsylvania doesn't have a list. It just has the line, the whole state is a cluster. You see, the Keystone State is the largest cluster in the book at a whopping 39 cases, most of which involve children under the age of 16. Over the last several months, we've put out a couple of videos on the Pennsylvania cluster, and if we're being honest, it's essentially non-existent, at least for the most part. There were certainly a couple of genuinely puzzling ones, like the girl who was found in plain sight along a rural highway in a place that had been searched multiple times, but nearly all of the disappearances Paulides wrote about were perfectly mundane cases of children who wandered off into the woods when their parents weren't looking, with a clear-cut kidnapping or two along the way. The pattern starts to break down, however, when you examine the cases involving older teenagers and grown adults. A 3-year-old probably can't articulate how they went missing or what happened while they were gone, but a 15-year-old can. It's easy to understand how a 7-year-old might get lost in a trailless section of the woods, but less so when the missing person is a 37-year-old on an established hiking path. The cases of missing adults in Pennsylvania are by far the most intriguing, though not always for the same reason. In some of them, law enforcement made strange decisions that didn't match up with procedure or even common sense, and in others, the disappearance left behind so few clues that even the FBI would have struggled to track down the answers. These are the cases where it's abundantly clear that whatever happened, it was the work of some kind of monster, be it human or otherwise, and today we're going to go over several of them. Sometimes there are two very different narratives of the same story, and the case of Karen Cooney is one such example. On July 8, 1968, 15-year-old Karen was helping with chores around her family's home in Corey, a small town in northwestern Pennsylvania's Erie County. As the story goes, Karen was outside hanging laundry out to dry when, at about 11 a.m., her mother and her 2 teenage brothers heard her screaming from the backyard. According to a July 9th article in the Pittsburgh Press, 13-year-old Dean and 12-year-old Michael, who had been working in the garden out front, threw down their tools and quickly ran around the side of the house to see what was the matter, only to find that their older sister was nowhere to be found. We looked, Dean told the press, but we couldn't see Karen, so we went inside and got Mom. The mother, Mildred Cooney, had also heard the scream, though she had assumed that her daughter had just been frightened by one of the small snakes common to Pennsylvania forests. When she learned that Karen wasn't there, however, she ran outside to look around for herself, and then called her husband, at work at the nearby furniture factory, to tell him what had happened. James Cooney wasted no time in seeking help for his missing daughter, and notified the state police as soon as he got off the phone with his wife. Even now, the area in which the Cooneys lived is surrounded by dense forests and broad swaths of farmland, and searching through the wilderness was going to require more manpower than just the family and their immediate neighbors. The state police immediately jumped on the case, and before long, troopers and volunteers were spreading through the swampy woodland. Using bloodhounds and a plane, they searched for hours in the hot afternoon sun, only calling things off when the sun dipped below the trees and darkness came over the forests. Around 200 people, volunteers and law enforcement alike, were added again when the dawn light came over the horizon, aided from the air by an additional helicopter out of Blairsville and on the ground by a pair of FBI agents from the Erie field office. While some might question such early involvement from the feds, in Karen's case this was likely due to a couple of significant factors. First of all, she was a minor, and the FBI has a mandate to assist in cases of missing children if requested by local law enforcement. Additionally, the New York state line is just 2 miles from where the Coonies lived, so the possibility that she had been kidnapped and taken out of Pennsylvania was probably the primary reason for their involvement. Everyone was a bit surprised then, when Karen turned up just a half-mile from where she was last seen. She had wandered into a clearing near Leisure Lake, just a short ways southeast of the Cooney property, and was spotted from the Blairsville helicopter flying overhead. State troopers quickly made their way over to the location and found the missing teenager in good condition. Just to be sure, they had the helicopter take her to the local hospital in downtown Corey, where doctors confirmed that she appeared to be in a slight state of shock, but otherwise she was healthy. In fact, she was surprisingly free of scratches and mud, at least for a girl who had spent the last 27 hours wandering through the woods. It was a happy ending to a brief horror story, but that's where things get a little weird. The entire time that Karen had been missing, police were operating under the assumption that she had likely been kidnapped. According to the Latrobe Bulletin, her disappearance had been marked by a short scream cut off mid-shout, while the Pittsburgh Press reported that the only clues to the disappearance were some scuff marks in the grass where she was standing and a half-choked scream. A friend of Karen's, Betty Harvey, also gave police good reason to suspect a kidnapping when she reported that she had heard a car moving slowly in the vicinity around the time that Karen disappeared. Once she turned up alive and well, however, they very quickly changed their tune. Her disappearance was deliberate, a trooper told the press. She took her time, she could have come out of there yesterday, but she didn't. She took her little religious book in there with her. She thinks she remembers a number of things she couldn't. She's imagining these things. Those things, it would seem, were very explicitly a description of a kidnapping. Mrs. Cooney told the papers that Karen was still hazy about what had happened, but that she remembered being chased from the house by a very big man with a knife. According to Karen's account of the event, the man chased her a long way through the woods until she eventually became exhausted and later fell asleep. Police, meanwhile, claimed that Karen told them she had been high-strung lately and decided to take a walk in the woods to get away from it all. Mrs. Cooney found that hard to believe, considering that Karen wasn't restricted from going for walks, often rode her pony through the woods, and never went off without permission. This wasn't the only inconsistent part of the story, either. Papers couldn't seem to agree on who the pilot of the helicopter was, nor whether or not Mrs. Cooney had been in the aircraft when Karen appeared in the clearing. Several papers reported that the pilot was a man named Ray Custer, while a number of others identified him as James Shearer, though all agreed he was from Blairsville. On top of that, some said she appeared very dazed and suggested she wandered out of the woods, while others wrote that she actively sought rescue and was jumping up and down and waving her arms when sighted. All of these reports came in on the same day, with the papers that reported her as waving her arms also reporting that the pilot was James Shearer, while the papers saying that she was dazed named Ray Custer. Another issue which called into question the narrative that Karen had walked off of her own accord was the fact that 2 other girls had gone missing in the same 2-day span. Edith McCreary had just disappeared from Titusville, 23 miles to the south, and Sheila Oldach had vanished from Harbor Creek, 20 miles to the northeast, on the same night as Karen. I couldn't find any reporting on either girl independently of the articles on Karen, but the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported that Sheila too had described being abducted and then held prisoner by a large man. Like Karen, she was eventually recovered alive by state troopers not far from the highway and had no injuries besides some scratches to her neck. It could be a coincidence that all 3 girls disappeared around the same time, but due to the fact that there appears to be no reporting on the other 2 whatsoever, it's kind of hard to look for any further connections. The bizarre disappearances and the lack of police investigation, as well as the abrupt change of direction regarding what they believed happened as soon as the missing girls were found, weren't unique amongst the Pennsylvania cluster of cases. Decades earlier, in Philadelphia, another strange case of a missing young woman appeared in the papers. Her name was Elsie Flothmeyer, the 22-year-old daughter of Reverend Frederick Flothmeyer, and as a Philadelphia area native, this one genuinely puzzles me. Elsie was last seen alive in late February of 1932 in the Fox Chase and Burholm neighborhood on the northern outskirts of the city. Why this was included in a Missing 411 book, when these are supposed to be stories of odd disappearances in and around national and state parks, I do not know. My only guess is because it technically did involve a park, even if it was in fact a very small park in the middle of dense suburban sprawl. Out of place as it may be, however, it is still on the weird side, so it's worth discussing. According to Elsie's father, he had been taking her along on visits to parishioners' homes, and at around 4 p.m. on February 23rd, she asked him to let her out between stops so that she could go for a walk in Burholm Park. She agreed to meet back up with him at a cousin's house at 8 Chandler Street on the other side of the park, and with that she stepped out of the car at the corner of Tabor and Blay. The area looked a little bit different at the time, but the walk from that intersection through the park and to her cousin's house would have covered about 1.85 miles, that's about 3 kilometers, if she took the most direct route along the roads and trails. Reverend Flothmeyer thus expected to see Elsie arrive at the Wegner property on Chandler around 4:30, and when she didn't turn up, he began to worry. Elsie's father struck out to trace the path she would have taken, but after walking from Chandler Street back to the intersection, he still couldn't locate her. According to the Lancaster Intelligencer-Journal, the only trace he could find was that one of the park guards had seen her enter the park, and at that point, he contacted the police. There was very little reporting about the search itself, which lasted only 24 hours and ended with the tragic discovery of Elsie's body lying face downward in a ditch near a blackberry thicket in Burholm. The interesting part came with the reporting of how she was found and what authorities determined to be the cause of death. According to the Intelligencer-Journal, the discovery was made by Lester Spurl, 18, and Luther Allenberg, 17, who were among the last to see the girl alive as she strolled through the vicinity Tuesday afternoon. Her body was quickly transported to the city morgue, where a coroner determined that exposure and exposure alone was the cause of death. It had been a cold night, and police surmised that Elsie had suffered some sort of mental lapse while walking through the park. While in many cases we see parents disagreeing with such findings, in this circumstance the father was quoted as saying, "I feel that her mind must have become distraught when she found herself lost in a strange section of the city." And he agreed with authorities that her death must have been caused by some exposure. To be fair, that's not an inconceivable conclusion. By all accounts, Elsie had been struggling with her mental health for years. A breakdown caused by academic stress had at one point left her hospitalized for 4 months, and 3 years prior to her disappearance, she had suffered a mental lapse while visiting relatives in Germany, to the extent that her mother was obliged to travel to Germany to bring her back home. On top of all of that, her father acknowledged that her recent academic failures had left her depressed and worried, and that he was constantly afraid to permit his daughter to leave their home alone. Much of the other reporting seemed to support the conclusion that she wasn't in the best state when she walked into that park. The Inquirer reported that, along with the park guard who saw her at the entrance, 3 men who worked for the Feaster Brothers Coal Company had also seen her walk through their coal yard that afternoon, while 2 teenage boys had seen her walking on Oxford Avenue between Loney and Borbeck Streets until she came to the coal yard, where she paused and looked about her uncertainly. Then, some 5 minutes later, they saw her walking across a field on the other side of the coal yard toward Veery Road. Now, according to those boys, after their sighting, they just forgot about it. The path described by the boys would have seen her take a right off of Blay and onto Oxford, and then she would have cut across the train tracks to pass through the coal yard, heading southeast towards Veery. According to the Inquirer, they found her in a broad, windswept meadow several hundred yards west of the 7900 block of Veery Road, which would have put her on the property of Gian's Hospital, now part of a larger Temple University medical complex. It is possible that she didn't turn onto Oxford off of Blay, but rather made her way up to Central before going on to Oxford, and that would track with the claim from the guard that he didn't actually see her enter the park, but instead that she was walking back and forth at the entrance about a mile from the scene of the tragedy. All of that is within the realm of reason, especially if she had become disoriented or made a decision to harm herself. But it's when you begin to consider the rest of the reporting that things get weird. While the Inquirer reported that beneath a huge lopsided yellow moon, buffeted by a freezing northern blast, Elsie, bereft of reason, plucked her clothing from her body, piece by piece, and wandered naked across a wintry field to her death, the paper also noted that her body was found, nude save for a flimsy silken girdle, cruelly scratched by brambles. The Inquirer also reported that 50 feet away, draped over the brambles of a blackberry bush, was her dress. Other items of clothing were strewn closely about. The paper went on to explain that from that bush to the field trench where her body lay were the clearly defined imprints of her feet. From this, the police concluded that after she had removed all of her clothing, she had essayed to walk, but as the cold earth numbed her feet, she placed upon them her shoes. This would imply that after stripping off all but a garter, she chose to carry her shoes with her. Why they decided she'd taken her shoes off in the first place is unclear, but they believe she had stepped slowly, then broke into a run, and after several steps, the right shoe flew from her foot. The left shoe then supposedly followed after, and then frantic feet padded on and on before she ultimately succumbed to the cold and fell down. This, of course, is a possibility, though an unquestionably odd one. Still, if the clothes and footprints were all anyone had to go on, it would be hard to argue against it. The problem is that it wasn't all anyone had to go on. As reported just a few paragraphs later, a woman who lived not far from the place where Elsie's body was discovered told police that she believed she'd heard a scream several hours after Elsie disappeared. Helen Soltis of 737 Borbeck Street told investigators and reporters, "I was in the kitchen. I thought I heard a scream. I dismissed it as imaginary." Once she learned of Elsie's situation, however, she began to wonder if she hadn't imagined it, and recalled how later throughout the night I started from sleep, feeling I had heard the scream again. Adding to that mystery was her recollection that she heard the neighborhood's dogs howling all night. The Intelligencer Journal added more to her story, including the claim that she heard groans issuing from the field about 9 or 10 p.m., along with the testimony of another female neighbor who said that she'd seen a man walking from the field about 11 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday night. And that wasn't all. Oddly, the paper couldn't seem to keep its reporting straight regarding the injuries Elsie had sustained prior to her death. On the one hand, the Inquirer reported that a doctor who lived on the 7900 block of Oxford Avenue was first to examine Elsie on the scene, and that he discovered only the scratches and bruises of her mad fight. But also, there was nothing to indicate that she had been choked, beaten, or otherwise harmed. Perhaps the word misprinted the word flight, but I have to wonder if the journalist didn't make something of a Freudian slip. An article from the Intelligencer, published the same day as the Inquirer article, described her injuries differently, reporting that the thighs bore deep cuts and scratches, and there were stains resembling blood on the shoulder of her dress and on her underclothing found nearby. Apparently sent to print before the police announced her cause of death as self-inflicted, the paper noted that the detective said the scratches on the thighs might have been inflicted by the briars which surrounded the spot, though some of them resembled fingernail marks. Also absent from the Inquirer article was the detail that Elsie's face was distorted as if in terror, and the hair was in wild disorder. One very relevant contradiction was also present, that being the claim that the girl's clothing lay in an orderly pile 100 yards from the body. Dress, stockings, shoes, coat, hat, slip, and underwear. The Inquirer, meanwhile, had described her clothes as being flung about and her shoes kicked off mid-run. The Pittsburgh Gazette and Sayre Evening Times brought similar reports through the United Press Wire Service, which claimed that she undressed under the delusion she was preparing for bed and then lay down on the cold ground. This could be chalked up to shoddy reporting, but for the fact that it came directly from the head of the psychology department at Temple, Dr. Thaddeus Bolton, who attributed the whole thing, and I am not making this up, to moon madness. According to Dr. Bolton, the theory of moon madness is based on the observation of a natural condition among near-insane and nervous persons. The attacks of extreme nervousness usually recur at regular intervals about 28 to 30 days apart, coinciding as they do with the full moon. It has long been thought by many that the moon's rays are responsible. In a stunning display of how primitive psychology was in the 1930s, he continued on, asserting that when she left her father and started to walk through the woods, it is possible she became more agitated, thinking of her schoolwork. Then, as night came on, she became lost, and with the full moon shining over her head, completely lost her reason. While I'm sure the good doctor had his reasons to genuinely suspect that the moon was responsible, I think there's another option, and I can't figure out for the life of me why it wasn't considered. You see, the two teenage boys who found her were the same Lester Spurl and Luther Allenberg who reported seeing her walking around and through the coal yard, and they said she was headed southeast. Yet when they found her, she was to the southwest of where they said she had been going. In addition to that, one thing that came up repeatedly in the reports was the mention of a shack. A shack that, according to the Intelligencer Journal, those two boys had been building or working on not far from where Elsie turned up. As if that wasn't suspicious enough on its own, the Inquirer reported that Allenberg, who lived at 7932 Oxford Avenue, had told Spurl, "Pretty soon we'll hear about that girl disappearing." Taken together, we have a story saying that two of the last people to see Elsie alive, after dark, who had a shack in the woods near where she was found, were also the people to find her, in a place they had, by their own account, no reason to believe she was, and they were on record saying they believed she was likely to disappear from the moment they saw her. I don't think I need to spell out what might have happened based on that information. Now, are either Karen Cooney or Elsie Flothmeyer's disappearances really the kind of thing that should qualify for a missing 411 entry? Absolutely not, considering both of them have the far more likely explanation of young women being assaulted by men who chased them into the woods. Are they both rather odd and technically unsolved? Yes. Are there better, more truly unsolved mysteries left to cover in this episode? Perhaps. He was gone 94 days, and there's that many nights I've laid awake wondering what happened to him. These were the words of Ina Scott to the Pittsburgh Press on November 1st, 1978, after the discovery of her 31-year-old son Dwayne's body near Camp Tree Farms in rural Beaver County, Pennsylvania. Dwayne's disappearance didn't garner much news coverage outside of the Pittsburgh area, but what the media did publish was certainly a little bizarre. When he first disappeared at the end of July, the Pittsburgh Press didn't have much to report. The missing man was a 31-year-old resident of Western State School in Canonsburg, essentially an assisted living facility for adults with mental disabilities. He disappeared while on a 6-day field trip to Camp Tree Farm, and the last anyone saw of him was when he left his cabin around 9 p.m. on Thursday the 27th to use the bathroom. Dogs couldn't pick up a scent, searchers couldn't find any trace of his whereabouts, and helicopters failed to spot him from above. Then, reports started to filter in from the surrounding area. We received 6 confirmed sightings of Dwayne, up to a point where he was hitchhiking on Newcastle Street, Camp Director Gary Bauman told the press on July 30th. When police arrived in Zelienople just 15 minutes later, he was already gone. Dwayne's family found that hard to believe, not because they thought that the camp was hiding something, but because there was no way he would hitchhike. Dwayne's uncle, Herb Scott, found it far more likely that if he somehow had gotten lost, he would be sitting around waiting for someone to pick him up. And if he was, the question was where? As the search went on, it became harder and harder for anybody to answer that. The state police were covering the roads, the National Guard had been called in, and hundreds of volunteers were working their way through the forests around the camp day after day. But there was no sign of Dwayne anywhere. It was hard to imagine he was just wandering around any of the towns in Beaver or any of the surrounding counties, especially after searchers distributed 20,000 leaflets bearing his name, description, and likeness across the 8 counties surrounding Zelienople and Camp Tree Farm. If he was anywhere, he would have to have been in the woods, but everything about Dwayne's personality also made that seem unlikely. Herb Scott told the press that his nephew not only had no sense of direction, but that he was deathly afraid of darkness and water, making it hard to understand why he would have wandered off so late at night in an area surrounded by creeks and rivers. By late August, there had been more sightings of Dwayne, but state police had no idea what to make of them. The only ones which seemed like they might bear fruit involved an older gray-haired woman who 2 waitresses said was accompanied by a man resembling Dwayne if he wasn't wearing his glasses. He wasn't wearing the same pink long-sleeve t-shirt Dwayne was wearing on the night he disappeared, but when police showed waitresses the pictures, they seemed confident that it was Dwayne they'd seen. The woman was showing him pictures, Jenny Witzel told the press for an August 27th article, noting that each time one was shown, he smiled. The other waitress, Kathy Podgorski, reported that the woman had mentioned that she was going to take the man to a farm. That seemed like a very good lead to police, but not to Dwayne's mother, Ina, who said that he wouldn't go with a stranger. His sister agreed, not only with the claim that he wouldn't have gone anywhere with somebody he didn't know, but also that a report of Dwayne having a history of running away was completely false. He was the kind of person who didn't make a lot of decisions on his own, she said. He always asked people what he was supposed to do. But who would have told Dwayne to leave Camp Tree Farm? The confusion only intensified when Dwayne's body turned up months later in October of 1978. A pair of hunters were working their way through the woods 2 miles from camp when they stumbled across the decomposed body of a man half a mile up a steep hillside. Authorities quickly identified the man as being Dwayne Scott, and the coroner had no trouble establishing that there was no evidence of foul play at autopsy. No broken bones, no ligature marks, nothing to indicate that someone had attacked him. And yet, there was also no way to explain how he got there. The location where Dwayne's remains were found was almost impossible to get to, according to his mother, in a place where his sister said that searchers couldn't have made it to where he was without having their skin torn off. And yet, Dwayne's clothes were completely intact. without a single rip or tear anywhere on them. It should also be noted that the reporting did not clarify if they were the same clothes he was wearing when he disappeared. According to Richard Nelkin, Associate Director of the Allegheny County chapter of the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens, the group which operated Camp Tree Farm, there were only a few ways that Duane could have possibly have ended up where they found him. One involved him hiking a mile and a half through dense thickets of thorn bushes, which ran up and down steep hillsides, all of which seemed very unlikely. Another had him walking 3.5 miles along a nearby roadway before entering into the brush, but he still would have had to contend with the thorn bushes and terrain for some distance to get to where he was. Then the third possibility was that he got there some other way, but Nelkin didn't elaborate on what that would be. Nina Scott, however, did, and said, "I think somebody took him around a road in a car and took him in there." The question would be how they managed that, considering Duane was a full-grown adult man, and anyone doing this would need to carry him through the woods and then murder him without leaving any sign of doing so. Officials wanted to know the answer and launched a probe to do so, but the last reporting I could find said that they planned to perform a toxicology test in hopes of determining a cause of death. Unfortunately, the results appear to have gone unpublished, and to this day, Duane's case remains unsolved, with absolutely no explanation of what may have happened. Nobody knows how he got there, if that was really him hitchhiking, and it doesn't even seem that the woman sighted with a man resembling him could be tracked down. Duane's case is just one giant question mark that seems like it almost has to have been foul play, if only because no other explanation could possibly make sense. Is it supernatural? Probably not, but it's certainly one of the more inexplicable ones that I've looked at for this series. That said, it's not the only one I found in which a man inexplicably disappeared into the forest without a trace, nor do I think it's the most intriguing of the group. The most intriguing disappearance that I came across while working my way through the Pennsylvania cluster actually caught my eye for a completely different reason than any of the others, that being a hilarious geography error by David Paulides. Westchester, Pennsylvania sits very near Pennsylvania's Grand Canyon, otherwise known as Pine Creek Gorge. The section on Michael Malinowski begins, "No, it doesn't look like the Grand Canyon in Arizona, but it is a deep gorge with great views." Westchester hosted a psychology conference the week of October 21st, 1996, that attracted the attendance of Michael Malinowski. Now, I actually attended Westchester University for a couple of semesters to work on my master's degree, which is why I actually laughed out loud when I read that passage for the first time. For those unfamiliar with Pennsylvania, the Pine Creek Gorge is damn near as far away from Westchester as you can get while remaining in the state. But as I said, that's not the reason it made it into the "this is genuinely odd" section of this series. The reason for that is how bizarrely exclusive the reporting on this case was. Now, I don't mean that it was only covered locally. I mean that outside of one specific article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the only paper to cover this story was the Elmira Star-Gazette out of New York, which is, admittedly, much more local to the case. Embedded in that Inquirer article, however, is the reason that the only other paper to cover this story was the Star-Gazette. It's because that's the only paper the family would speak to. Not only that, but it seems that the story might not have been covered at all had Michael's sister, Jane Stawicki, not explicitly asked the Star-Gazette to look into it. For some reason, the family gave extensive interviews to this one small-town paper in an entirely different state from where Michael disappeared, and not even his roommate would speak with the far more reputable and far-reaching Philadelphia paper. Now, of course, since we're talking about the Inquirer so much in this video, I do have to make the obligatory reminder that we figured out who the boy in the box's parents were before they did, and then they just took it and didn't credit us. Still waiting on the apology, guys. Referring to internet sleuths was not enough. We're in your backyard. Anyway, moving swiftly along, it's just bizarre that a missing man's family would seek media attention, but then try to limit that attention as much as possible. Even when the Star-Gazette put out a piece on the case's 10th anniversary, in which Malinowski's sister and former roommate both said they hadn't given up hope that he was still alive, they refused to seek a larger platform than that one paper, which to this day has a circulation of only 13,400. Equally as strange is the fact that I could find absolutely nothing about Malinowski's son or ex-wife regarding his disappearance. John Malinowski is now nearing 40, and from what I can tell, he's never been asked about his father, nor has he spoken out about the disappearance. And that's not a knock on him either. He was a kid when his dad vanished into thin air, and by all accounts, Michael absolutely loved his son. I just wonder if there could be a reason why the only people to ever come forward and ask for information were Michael's sister and roommate, and why neither of them were willing to speak to anyone besides the Star-Gazette. Looking into Michael's actual disappearance doesn't really lend any clues either. Paulides is correct, despite his geographical mishap, that Malinowski attended a conference in Westchester before heading out to the Pine Creek Gorge on Thursday, October 24, 1996. He was himself a psychologist and worked for a nonprofit in Trenton, New Jersey. According to the article in the Inquirer, after leaving the conference, he drove up to one of his favorite getaway spots, the Pine Tree Lodge in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, where he checked in at about 5 o'clock p.m. That same night, he called home and left a message on his roommate's answering machine, the content of which it would appear has never been made public. Nobody is entirely sure what happened after that, but on the following Monday, October 28th, the manager at the lodge called the police to file a missing persons report. Michael hadn't been seen since he checked in 4 nights prior, and neither he nor his car were at his cabin. Not long after the report was filed, a Forestry Bureau worker stumbled across Michael's rented 1995 Nissan Sentra. Someone, presumably Malinowski, had parked the car on Colton Point Road at the access trail to the Barber Rock Overlook, and inside the vehicle, police found an unzipped day pack on the front seat, Malinowski's jacket draped over the passenger seat, a nearly empty water jug, some apples and crackers, and an empty camera case. The Star-Gazette clarified that there was a box of low-fat Cheez-Its on the floor, next to a 2/3 empty jug of water and tan rubber-soled bean boots, as well as an empty camera box on the dash and a cassette in the stereo. According to the Inquirer, Gaines Township Police Chief Mark Reziu said it looked as if Malinowski parked the car, perhaps filled a couple of water bottles, grabbed his camera, and took off for a hike over familiar trails. Law enforcement assumed, based upon that evidence, that something must have happened out on the trail. Maybe Michael had gotten lost and hurt himself, or perhaps he'd gotten too close to the edge of the overlook and fallen down the near 1,000-foot drop into the canyon below. Search teams deployed to the area the following day, including volunteer climbers, a state police helicopter, a hospital helicopter out of Sayre, Pennsylvania, and 3 dog teams from Union County. All day, ground teams searched the 400-yard strip of heavy forest between Colton Point Road and the canyon's western rim, while 2 of the dog teams worked their way up the side of the canyon itself alongside the climbers. But despite their effort, there was no sign of the missing psychologist. Authorities were puzzled, to say the least, but they weren't deterred. Despite bad weather grounding helicopters and impeding the use of dogs, they pressed on through the following day. According to Chief Reziu, Michael's roommate, Greg Rossi, said that he didn't believe Michael intended to harm himself, and that, if anything, Michael's love for his son would be keeping him going during whatever ordeal he was experiencing. But that didn't rule out the possibility that he might have fallen over the edge while taking pictures. With that in mind, the Wednesday search efforts concentrated on the area below the overlook, with teams at the base looking for any sign that he might have fallen as rappellers scanned the area just beneath the canyon rim. It was slow going, as climbers checked any little nook and cranny, any brush pile where a body could be lying. As paramedic Ray Mossman put it, there are places where you could be 20 feet from the guy and not see him. By Thursday, the canyon was no longer the sole focal point of the search. Horse teams searched the area west of Colton Point Road, and the canine teams swapped out their scent trackers for cadaver dogs. But still, nothing came of it. By the end of the day on Friday, the search was losing steam, and with no leads to follow, authorities made the difficult decision to suspend the effort. After days of intensive searches, Pennsylvania Department of Conservation District Forest Ranger David Gregg told the press that the chance that he is in the area we searched is 0. But that didn't mean they had given up completely, or that they were ready to consider Michael to be just another case of a lost hiker. Pennsylvania State Police made that clear through their classification of Malinowski as missing under unusual or suspect circumstances, suggesting that they had reason to believe it might not be so clear-cut as someone stepping off of a trail. That might have had something to do with the fact that, according to Forester Gregg, searchers found no evidence other than Michael's car to indicate that he had been in the area of the canyon that was searched. Dogs hadn't hit on anything, none of Michael's belongings had turned up during the search, and highly specialized search and rescue professionals like Navy SAR veteran Randy Herr were at a complete loss as to the lack of any trace of Malinowski's whereabouts in the area. Gregg's comments were, in my opinion, a subtle way of signaling to the press that they suspected foul play. And a few days later, Chief Resu made that clear when he called in State Police criminal investigator Tom Green for assistance. Resu said investigators hadn't ruled out foul play, the Star-Gazette reported on the 8th. In fact, they haven't ruled out anything. Police got to work retracing the evidence through the lens of a criminal investigation, and one of the first things that stuck out was the state of Malinowski's lodging. The bed in his cabin appeared to have been slept in that night, Chief Resu told Lacey McCrary of the Inquirer. He was obviously very meticulous. All his things were put away very neatly. There was enough clothing for a 2-day stay. His coat was draped over a chair, and his shoes were carefully stowed beneath the bed. According to the Star-Gazette, the heat inside of the cabin had also been left on, which Malinowski's roommate said was entirely out of character. He never, ever left the heat on, Greg Rossi told the paper, speaking to the press directly for the first time since the investigation started on December 1st, 1996. Rossi also found the position of Malinowski's car, found at a slight angle relative to the retaining fence in front of it, to be uncharacteristic of his friend, who he believed would have made sure the car was at 90 degrees to the fence. As for their opinions on what might have happened, both Rossi and Michael's sister, Jane Stawicki, were sure of one thing. Michael would not have harmed himself. There's no way Michael wanted to end his own life, Rossi told the paper. Absolutely no way. According to his roommate, Michael was not depressed and was actively seeking employment in Seattle to be closer to his son. And, the paper continued, he had no reason to want to disappear. Rossi and the Stawicki said, no financial problems, no drugs, no offended husbands, which is a weird statement that I don't know how it actually even came up. But if not self-inflicted or self-imposed, there really only were two other options. One possibility brought forward by Jane was that Michael had been shot accidentally by a hunter, but police found that unlikely because it was archery season, and his car was parked next to a recreational trail. No hunters should have been anywhere near him, and bow hunting occurs at much closer quarters than rifle hunting, with projectiles that don't travel nearly as far. The other possibility was that Michael had been attacked by someone, either at his cabin or when he arrived at the trail, and the evidence seemed to point in that direction. The former hypothesis is based primarily on the fact that the heat was left on and the orientation of Michael's car where it had been parked. If that were the case, it would mean that the car was staged, and that Michael was probably taken somewhere else in a different vehicle. What would have happened after that is hard to say, but since he's never shown up anywhere since, it's very unlikely that he survived. Alternatively, somebody might have trailed him to the overlook and then made their move once he was alone in the woods. This would make it considerably easier to take him without witnesses, but even if we discount the possibility that he simply parked abnormally and left the heat on when he left, there is the problem of dogs being totally unable to pick up a scent leading away from his car. Rossi, for his part, heavily favored the cabin attack scenario. He told the Star-Gazette that he was absolutely certain that the heat was not left on by Michael, and that he was 95% certain that he didn't park that car there. But that's not the only intriguing thing about Rossi's interview with the paper. Rossi didn't think this was a random attack, and reportedly said, "I believe he was apprehended by somebody he knew." The only problem was that, as Rossi put it, Michael didn't have an enemy in the world. Michael was more nonviolent than John Lennon. The final words of the December 1st, 1996 article were attributed to Rossi as well. As it stands now, I could not concoct a better script for Robert Stack and Unsolved Mysteries. Now, following the release of that article, the Star-Gazette didn't say much about Michael's case until the first anniversary of his disappearance. But when they eventually did, new details came to light. On October 26, 1997, the Star-Gazette reported that Rossi found a few more things about the situation to be peculiar. It had to be cold that morning, he said. Why did he leave his jacket in the car? His employer's cell phone was in an unzipped backpack in the front seat. He couldn't have done that. He would have locked it in the trunk. Beyond that, he found it hard to believe that Michael would have worn his sneakers onto the trail, especially when his LL Bean hiking boots were found sitting inside of the car. Rossi was adamant that Michael would not, as the paper originally suggested, have waited until he got to the canyon to change his shoes either. He would lace up his hiking boots in the kitchen when he went for a walk in the park, Rossi added. It just doesn't fit. It's unclear if these were new quotes or if they derived from unpublished material compiled the prior year, but Rossi also reaffirmed his belief that Michael wouldn't have voluntarily disappeared, and that he'd even told a neighbor the night before he left that he was definitely going to Seattle to be closer to his son. 10 years later, the case was still open, and absolutely no closer to being solved. All of the evidence pointed towards something criminal, But the problem was that there was no evidence of how or why. An October 27, 2006 article in the Star-Gazette retold the story in full, covering both old information and what little new developments had occurred. But even after a decade of active investigation, there had been no movement. And that's extremely unusual for the Pennsylvania Forestry Bureau. According to one of the searchers, former forest ranger and Navy search and rescue operative Randy Herr, Malinowski was the only person the Forestry Bureau has searched for and failed to find. In his opinion, that meant that Michael was either snatched and abducted, or he'd disappeared of his own volition and was still alive. And his family remained adamant that they didn't believe the latter was possible. I think if Michael did plan his own disappearance, Rossi said in 2006, he would have found a way, even if through a third party, to get word to me or his sister. More importantly, it seems Michael never reached out to his son, the one person in the world both Rossi and the Stoickies said he would never have left behind for any reason. The problem is, of course, that nobody in the world seems to have had any reason to hurt Michael Malinowski. He had no known enemies, worked with special needs and elderly clients, and he was far away from anyone who might dislike him in his day-to-day life. There's one other thing that bothers me too, though I'm not sure what to make of it. Rossi told the paper in 2006 that he hoped news coverage of the 10th anniversary of Michael's disappearance might jog the memory of someone who saw something important they didn't consider important at the time, and lead to clues that could uncover his whereabouts. But if the goal was news coverage, why did Rossi and the Stoickies only ever speak to the Star-Gazette? According to Lucy McCrary's article, she reached out to the family in 1996, but they didn't want to speak with her or the Inquirer. Why turn down coverage in Pennsylvania's largest city's most circulated paper? And why, 10 years later, would they return to the same small-town news company and forgo any attempt at broader publicity? That's also not the only bizarre thing about the coverage. Not only is there zero mention of this case outside of the one article in the Inquirer and the several in the Star-Gazette, but the latter paper reported in 2006 that the Montel Williams show had covered the case, and yet I can find no trace of that episode. Granted, the show ran daily for 18 years and did not include the names of guests in the titles, but no combination of searches turned up anything involving Michael Malinowski. Maybe it's out there somewhere, but it's just weird that it's so incredibly difficult to find in today's day and age. Even AI search tools can't find it, and yes, I hated having to resort to that. At the end of the day, I think Michael probably was a victim of foul play, though it's not entirely clear why, nor can I understand why his loved ones didn't seek any broader media attention even when they explicitly said it was what they wanted. I do wonder what the nature of his relationship with Greg Rossi was, and if perhaps there was more to it than anyone was letting on. It was almost 30 years ago, so I wonder if they were a different kind of roommates, and if they were trying to keep that under wraps. There's no information on why Michael got divorced, or why his ex-wife moved across the country afterwards, but I don't think it's absurd to ask the question of if Michael's proclivities might have been out of sync with her own. Whether he and Rossi were more than just friends or not, if Michael was hiding something and revealed it to the wrong person, it could have led to something happening to him. That's just about the only thing I can think of as being a reason for someone to attack him in a place like Tioga County, but of course there's no evidence whatsoever. And that is what bugs me the most about this case. I'm gonna be honest, this actually wasn't supposed to be the end of the video. I ended up rearranging some things, so it just kind of ends there. Like that's it. That's the end of the video. If you wanna support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can join us on Patreon for $1 every month, hopefully. You can also buy our merch. I'm not wearing it right now, but it's from Bunker Branding, and it's very cozy. It comes in several designs. We have hoodies as well. We also have coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. Everything's linked in the description. I designed it myself. I used to be a barista at an artisan roastery. I know my coffee better than most. Well, yeah, join us on Discord too. bit.ly/jointhelodge, or hit the link in the description. What else is there? We have a live show, which we're currently late to because filming ran over for this. It goes up on podcast and listening platforms on Wednesday mornings. It's live here on Monday nights. What else is there? Oh, we have other channels. We have History Unhinged. We have The Weird Bible. We have my personal channel, Aiden Mattis, where I try to stream something every week on Fridays. Got that? Yeah, no, I know. We're here. We're here right now. We got to get all the Patreon people through at some point.
Yeah.
So I figure I'll just stall a little bit until the Patreon thing runs out.
That's valid. There are a lot of people.
There's a lot of people on the Patreon list. If you want to be on the Patreon list, it's $1. Is it still going?
Probably.
It's probably still going? Okay.
It's a long list now.
It's a long list, yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely thank you. I feel like I should start telling them secrets about my personal life.
That's a good call.
Yeah. So back when I was in high school, I played football for a year, and we had this thing called no